Welcome to the On the Air podcast, a companion to On the Air magazine, a bi-monthly magazine from ARRL for beginner to intermediate ham radio operators. I'm your host and the editor of On the Air magazine, Becky Schoenfeld, W1BXY. Every month, the On the Air podcast extends material found in On the Air magazine to help you learn about the many things the ham radio hobby and service has to offer. The On the Air podcast is sponsored by ICOM for the love of ham radio. So welcome to the September 2023 episode. In the September-October 2023 issue of On the Air, our cover story focuses on fox hunting, a radio direction finding activity that you can enjoy with a radio club or group, or even with just one or two other friends, and they don't even have to be a ham. Today we're joined by Rob Zielfelder, N1NUG, who wrote our cover story, Foxhunting Basics. And he's here to talk about how to get started in finding those foxes. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Becky.
Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So first things first, when we talk about ham radio fox hunting, we're not talking about trying to find a little woodland creature.
No, not at all.
Yeah, so what exactly is fox hunting?
Basically, when you're fox hunting, you're looking for a hidden transmitter of some kind. It may be actually a hidden transmitter in the woods, or it may be your friend who's hiding somewhere and you need to go find your friend, or a club member or something like that. So basically, it's just you're looking for another radio.
So that other radio can be a person with something as simple as a handheld radio?
Yep.
And I understand that some of these Fox transmitters are set up to run by themselves, and they're known as Foxboxes. What
Yep.
goes into a Foxbox?
There's a few different styles and kind of complexity of a Foxbox. Around here, we've got some groups that have put some together that are nothing more than basically an HT with some sort of a little controller that they put inside of something kind of weatherproof, like a spare ammo can or some kind of weatherproof box with a battery that's able to run it for maybe a week or two or something like that. Something that's small enough that they can hide, but not so small that it's not something, it's going to be hard to find. Mm-hmm. And typically they'll take and hide that somewhere in a public place, like a park, maybe a cemetery even, or state forest land, something like that, where they can kind of camouflage it and keep it out of the public eye, but still have it be reasonably findable by like the average person. There's also some smaller ones that you can get that are lower power, where in order to kind of use them, you need to be in closer proximity. Mm-hmm. Those are a little bit smaller. They can be hidden in a little bit more devious places. So some of the groups that like a little more of a challenge will use those. I've even seen some situations where they'll do, a fox hunt with a larger box, and then when you get to the larger box, there's a small one on another frequency. So when you're in the area, then you've got to go on foot and kind of look for that smaller one, and it gives you that extra challenge if you want it.
Cool. So about what kind of distance range do these fox hunts take place in?
It kind of depends on the setup. So with the automated Foxboxes, the ones that I've participated on here in Connecticut, I'd say the range can be anywhere between 5 and 10 miles, depending on how the person that constructed the box decided to construct it, what kind of power they want to run on their radio, and what kind of battery they have. And some of them will use a little bit bigger of an antenna. And of course, it also depends on where they place it. If they place it on a hilltop, it's going to be kind of accessible from further away. If it's in a valley, it might be a little bit closer range type hunt. Mm-hmm. Some of the ones that we do where it's kind of a live fox hunt, the ones that my club participates in, we do a radius of 20 miles. Oh. And that gives it a little bit more of a driving element.
Okay. So when you say a live fox hunt, that means the fox is a person with a handheld.
Yeah. So just for an example, the way our club does it, Every New Year's Day, we kind of do this traditional fox hunt. And it's also sort of an exercise for the club to exercise some of the gear that we have, the emergency response gear. We have a trailer that we have access to. So typically the club president will take the trailer, find a spot. He'll plan this all out ahead of time. And so instead of just an HT, he'll actually have the trailer with a 2-meter radio and maybe multiple antennas set up. And those are the 20-mile hunts. So he'll, set that up so that he can be heard at the starting location where we start from. And then from there, he might start to play games with the antennas he's using, the amount of power he's using, that kind of a thing, to kind of throw the hunters off and make the hunt a little more challenging.
So the Fox can be anything from a person with a handheld radio to an automated transmitter Foxbox kind of setup, or in your case with this longer 20-mile hunt, it's a whole MCOM trailer.
Yeah, it's an MCOM trailer. It's a whole event. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So that's the Fox side of it. So let's talk about the hunter side of it. What are the hunters equipped with? What kind of gear do they have, and how are they finding the fox?
So you can, as you can imagine, you can get as crazy as you want to with this. But sort of the average setup, say for the 20-mile hunt, is somebody's got a Yagi, whether it's a tape measure Yagi that they've constructed themselves, or maybe something that they've bought. I know there's Yagi kits that easily come apart and store in the trunk of your car, something like that. So the hunters will start with that, some kind of a directional antenna. And where our starting location is, at the beginning of the hunt, the fox will transmit for a predetermined amount of time. And the hunters will take their Yagis and try and get a bearing on which direction they think the fox is. And the radio that they're using will typically be an HT or something connected up to the Yagi. It doesn't have to be, but a radio with a signal meter. Because what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to turn that antenna and watch the signal meter and see where it's strongest. And that's sort of what I'll call the most basic setup. But there's some other setups that are a little more elaborate for those that are into more the technical side of the hobby. They can use something called a Doppler setup, where you have 4 antennas and a control box that automatically determines that bearing. They can use that. And then I've even seen some hams will construct something similar out of Arduinos and SDRs and get all crazy with tablets and different things and mapping apps and all that. But you don't need that to get started. You can start with just a simple handmade antenna and an HT.
Oh, wow. So you're on the hunt, you get that first signal from the fox, you check your radio, check the signal meter, and you kind of cast around with your antenna to see where that signal's the strongest. So you start off in a general direction. How do you continue to narrow down if you're on the right track, if you need to correct course?
There's a couple of techniques. I'm sort of old school, so I've always used sort of a paper map that I've drawn bearing lines on. And I'll correlate that with an actual compass, and I'll look at my map and get kind of a determination of what angle I'm looking at, and then I'll start looking at my map and look for likely places. The rule for our fox hunt is that the boxes have to be on public property. So I'm looking at the map for public access, and I'm starting to go that way. You can also, and in fact, I've just been introduced to this last weekend from a fellow Connecticut fox hunter. There's some apps that you can get that you can kind of do the same thing and project out a heading or a bearing on, an electronic map and kind of plan your route that way. But once you have that initial heading and start heading that direction, typically, again, for the live fox hunts, our fox will transmit every 5 minutes. So we'll drive until we get to a safe spot that we can pull over, and we know he's going to transmit, and we'll try to take another bearing. And if we're still reading the right direction, we know we're probably going the right way. Maybe not, but most likely. And if not, if we start to see, that we need to go a different way, then we'll adjust our course, look at the map or the mapping app, and kind of hone in on it that way. That's sort of, we do it as individual teams. But it's sort of the same technique if you were looking for an automated Foxbox as well. You'd have a sort of a start point. You'd be able to access that Foxbox. You'd see the signal. You'd get that bearing and start moving that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there a time limit? Is that part of the criteria for when all of this wraps up?
So for our hunt, there's not exactly a hard time limit.
Yeah.
Usually the first hunters come in under an hour. And then there's a bunch of us that straggle behind for whatever reason. And usually by the 2.5 hour mark, we're just kind of wrapping it up. So it's not super competitive. I know there are some timed fox hunts out there that people will set a time limit, and if you don't find it, then the fox announces where they are, kind of a thing. Whereas if you're looking for sort of a hidden transmitter, those are out there for as long as the battery will last, usually.
Yeah.
So you can take as much time as you want on those. And those are great for somebody that's just getting into fox hunting because you don't have that time limit. You can take your time and really understand kind of how to plot that course and drive around a little bit or walk around a little bit if you're that close and you're still having trouble finding it, kind of a thing.
Okay. And once the fox is found, is there a winner? Is it that kind of thing, or is it more just an exercise in getting out there and enjoying radio?
I think there's a little of both.
Yeah.
In our club, it's sort of bragging rights. There's a little plaque that gets passed around from year to year. So whoever wins keeps that plaque for a year and then gives it to the winner the next year. But other than that, it's just bragging rights, kind of a thing. And then with the automated Foxbox, there's really nothing. There's just a sort of an online chat group, and you can kind of post in there when you've found it and kind of share your experience, with the group, kind of a thing. So around here, it's pretty low key. Yeah.
So in instances of a club or a group going out and doing this, is there chat between the hunters? Do they help each other? Is there a spirit of sort of camaraderie and learning and helping each other? Is it a little more you keep to yourself, you try and figure things out?
On the live fox hunts, the fox actually encourages the chatter. And not so much that we're telling everybody where we think we're going, but we may share the initial bearing that somebody got, at the starting location. Or as the hunt progresses, some of the stragglers might start to chat like, hey, I think we should look over here, or I've already been to this location, I know there's nothing here, so nobody go there, that kind of a thing.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, there is a little bit of competitiveness where we're not outright, giving away the location or anything major, but if somebody's too far off course, they'll usually be told.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I've heard that sometimes if the fox is a live person, that sometimes they will give hints and clues, and sometimes they can be more straightforward, like I'm near a river, but sometimes it can be more like riddles or
that's the one thing that our club president usually does is he tries to give away something like that. Like for instance, he might say, I can see somebody walking a dog, and that could mean anything. And it kind of goes year to year. Sometimes he's a little more generous with his clues, and then some years, he's trying to stump us. Kind of like you said with the river. There was one year he was alluding to the river, and we all thought he was in one spot, and we went to that spot, and he was on the opposite side of the river.
Oh.
So everyone had to drive like 15 miles around to find the bridge.
Wow.
And yeah, so he was sneaky that year.
Yeah. So it sounds fun.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of fun.
How long have you been involved with this, and what do you find you get out of it?
So I actually, when I first got licensed back in the early 90s, the club was doing this same type of fox hunt, but more often. They were doing it, I think, once a month back then. And that was one of the activities that I first got involved in when I was licensed. me and another friend that was licensed at about the same time. So we had a lot of fun with it. Just enjoying kind of being out there, meeting the people in the club, learning about ham radio because we were new, and learning how propagation worked, at least as far as VHF goes, and direction finding, that kind of a thing, and learning how to use our radios, really. So I took a hiatus from it for a while, just life got in the way, and then maybe 5 or 7 years or so ago, I started to get active again and get involved with the fox hunts. And now that I have a young son, he's come along. My wife even gets involved sometimes, and my sister and brother-in-law are also licensed, and they participate. So it's turned into almost a family activity in some regards. So it's been great.
Yeah. So now you mentioned your sister and brother-in-law. They're licensed.
Yeah.
Are your wife and son licensed?
No, they're not licensed.
So this is an activity that you can share with folks who aren't licensed. And can you talk about how that works? How are we able to bring in these unlicensed folks into this activity?
Yeah, it was actually kind of a lot of fun during COVID when everyone was stuck at home. Our automated Foxbox group was putting Foxboxes out so that we had something to go do. So, my wife and son are tolerant of the radio hobby, I'll say, but not particularly interested in it until, we were sitting around the house, nothing to do. And I said, why don't we go out? Why don't you come with me and we'll try and find one of these Foxboxes. So I put all the gear in the car, and we started driving around, and my wife was getting into the navigation, and my son was really interested because it's like a game to him.
Yeah.
All the young kids love games, so this was just another game that we could play. And then when we got close enough where we were on foot, I would hand him the HT, and of course he can't transmit, but I had another one, and I could activate the Foxbox, and he could use his to receive and kind of try and help find that bearing on which way we should walk once we were kind of in that close range. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's great. So because so much of this activity is about receiving, people who don't have licenses can participate on literally the receiving end, because as long as you're not transmitting, you don't have to be licensed.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any standout stories from hunts? A time when, maybe a fox was really well hidden or disguised, or somebody who gave clues in a really interesting way, or something that you learned about radio?
I can tell you a story from my sister and brother-in-law that's pretty funny. They were out fox hunting themselves, and they're licensed, but they're not quite as involved in the hobby as some of us are. So they just had HTs, and they didn't have the directional antennas. So it took them a little while. They got into the area where the fox was, and they were walking around with their HTs and practicing the things that we had learned kind of as a group together. I wasn't with them at this time. So they're walking around, and I think it was 45 minutes or so. They couldn't find this fox. They knew it was close. And finally, I think it was my brother-in-law bent down to tie his shoe, and he saw something a little strange on the ground underneath a tree stump. And then he realized that the tree stump was the fox. Somebody had gone to the trouble to take a log and hollow it out and put a Foxbox inside of it.
Okay.
So there's that. And then, I remember back when I was first learning how to fox hunt, my friend and I we were the last place. I think it was our first fox hunt. We were driving around for hours. And the fox was like, do you want us to tell you where you are? No, we're going to find you. And we were persistent. And I think we finally got there, fully last place. And the club members felt so bad for us that the very next week, back then the rule was whoever came in first was the fox next month.
Oh, mm-hmm.
But they felt kind of bad for us, so they let us be the fox the next month. So then we were able to learn, some of the tricks on how to throw the hunters off when we were the fox, and learning about reflections and things like that. So when you're hunting at VHF or UHF, you can take that bearing and get a strong signal, but sometimes the signal will bounce off of hillsides or buildings or something like that. So we had gotten some coaching, and when we set up to be the fox, we set up our Yagi antenna and pointed it at a hillside to try and throw the hunters off so that they thought we were somewhere else. And it worked a little bit, but these guys were too seasoned, so they were able to figure it out.
Yeah.
But it was fun kind of learning that and seeing how it worked and that kind of a thing.
Great. So if somebody watching this or listening to this is a new ham or newer ham, or even an experienced ham who's never tried this before and is interested, what information or advice might you have for someone who wants to try fox hunting?
Just try it. You see if there's a local club in your area doing it. Just do some Google search or ask on your local repeater, that kind of a thing, and see if there's a club that can kind of help you get into it. There's, obviously videos out there of people who are constructing the automated Foxboxes and some fox hunting and that kind of a thing. Tons of resources online. Obviously the ARRL has some things that you can look at, articles, of past QST, that kind of a thing, that have tips and tricks, and even some articles on how you can build some of the equipment that you might need, kind of a thing. But really, you don't need much to get started.
Yeah.
Like we said, you can use an HT and a handmade Yagi antenna that you can put together for, on probably under $20 in parts from the hardware store. And then you just need another friend willing to hide, or you hide and let your friend find you, kind of a thing, and just start it that way. And you never know, if there's nothing in your area, you may be the one to start it.
Just takes you and one other person at the bare minimum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, so in the September-October issue of On the Air, Rob's article, Foxhunting Basics, is that issue's cover story. And you can get a lot of good information beyond what Rob gave us here in that article. And if you're ready to dig even deeper than that, you can check out an expanded version of Rob's article in the May 2023 issue of QST. He has a piece in there called Beginner Fox Hunting, and that goes into a little more about how a fox hunt progresses, how various pieces of equipment work, even beyond some of the equipment that we've talked about here, and strategies for being a successful hunter. And you can find the May 2023 issue of QST online at arrl.org/QST. So thanks again, Rob, N1NUG.
Thanks for having me.
Being with us here today, and appreciate it a lot. And the On the Air podcast will be back in October 73.
73.